You'd think banning a terrible thing would automatically make the world a better place, right? Well, brace yourself. Welcome to this explainer. Today we're looking at some hard, unforgiving data that is going to completely shatter that assumption. So, what actually happens when a developing country just outright bans child labor? You probably picture kids dropping their heavy tools and finally running off to school. But the hard data reveals a shocking, totally counterintuitive truth. 12.5%. That's right. When India passed its landmark prohibition law, it didn't eliminate child labor at all. It actually increased child employment by a staggering 12.5%. Let's dive into exactly how a policy meant to save kids ended up hurting them even more. Back in 1986, India passed this universally praised law. The noble goal was to rescue kids under 14 from dangerous factory work. The whole world cheered. But, as you'll see, laws written in comfortable air-conditioned offices often fail brutally out there on the ground. Here's the immediate problem they ran into. Employers didn't just suddenly stop hiring kids. No way. They just hid them. They wiped them off the official payrolls to dodge the new fines. So instead of freeing the children, the bans simply forced them into the shadows. And down there, they were exploited even further. Section 1. The brutal survival logic. Let's look at why this happened. Now, you might be wondering, why didn't parents just keep their kids home? Well, to understand this total policy failure, we have to strip away the cozy academic theory and look at the brutal math of extreme poverty. There's this economic concept called the subsistence baseline. It's the absolute minimum daily income a family needs to literally not starve to death. Poor parents don't want their kids to work, but when adult wages fall below that absolute line of starvation, survival just trumps everything else. So the domino effect here is absolutely ruthless. First, the ban drops. Because of that, the employer's legal risk goes way up. To offset the risk of getting hit with fines, what do employers do? They slash the wages of the children they're still secretly employing. Suddenly, the family's overall income plummets below that starvation baseline. The only move they have left? Send even more kids to work just to survive. This complex economic chart proves that simple, brutal reality. When children get paid less per hour, they have to work way more hours just to make the exact same amount of money. Or the family has to send more siblings to join them, pushing that labor supply curve outward. It's wild. But the ban literally created the exact humanitarian disaster it was trying to prevent. Section 2. The sibling domino effect. This is where researchers hit upon some of the most tragic data. Because families desperately needed to make up for that lost income, and the adult labor market was already completely full, they couldn't rely on the parents. So, they had to sacrifice their younger children. Kids aged 10 to 13 were thrust straight into the labor market. Researchers isolated this exact effect, and the numbers are crazy. A child between 10 and 13 saw their likelihood of working jump nearly a full percentage point. Why? Simply because they had a sibling impacted by the ban. The law crushed the wages of one working child, triggering a devastating chain reaction right inside the home. And this detail, it's honestly infuriating. Older siblings over 14 were completely unaffected. The adult labor market didn't magically absorb the shock like policymakers hoped. Instead, the cheapest, most vulnerable members of the family paid the ultimate price. Section 3. Where did the children go? Think about it for a second. If these children were legally banned from manufacturing, where did they physically go to work? I mean, they didn't just go to the playground. They were pushed out of somewhat higher-paying, regulated factory jobs straight into completely unregulated, back-breaking farm labor. See, family farms were mostly exempt from these new rules. So we saw a massive influx of desperate kids into agriculture. And what happens when a market gets flooded with desperate labor? Wages crash. Agricultural child wages hit rock bottom across the entire sector. The disease wasn't cured, folks. It just mutated. Section 4. A sacrificed future. The collateral damage of this law went way, way beyond just working hours and lost wages. This stat is an absolute gut punch. For every single child forced into the labor market, there was a 1-to-1 drop in school enrollment. Every time a sibling stepped into a muddy field to make up for a banned factory wage, another child was permanently pulled out of the classroom. Section 5. The true cost of policy. Let's look at the hard, undeniable data on what this rights-based activism actually did to household survival. It's devastating. Across every single measurable metric, things got worse. Total expenditure? Decreased. The food they ate? It shifted to much cheaper, lower-quality staples. The poorest households became demonstrably and undeniably poorer. Out of sheer desperation, families began literally selling off their meager assets. They were selling the roofs over their heads just to afford basic, low-quality food. The law quite literally forced them to cannibalize their own lives. Now, one weird data point really stood out here. Caloric intake actually remained unchanged. But why? Well, because grueling physical labor on farms requires constant fuel. They couldn't even afford to cut back on calories because the kids needed maximum energy just to survive the exhausting physical demands of their new jobs. So, who actually suffered the most from all this? The data is entirely unforgiving. Highly educated households saw absolutely zero change in child labor. But illiterate households, they saw massive spikes. This policy disaster exclusively punished the most vulnerable, uneducated families, living on the absolute edge of starvation. Let's review this absolute anatomy of a policy failure. It completely ignored extreme poverty realities. It punished employers, who then just passed the cost right down to the children. It pushed kids from factories into even worse farm labor, and it destroyed family wealth and education. Legislating human rights without actually fixing the underlying economic poverty, it doesn't save children. It simply changes the location of their exploitation. Which leads us to a highly uncomfortable question. When we create laws to protect the vulnerable, are we actually fixing their reality, or are we just easing our own conscience? We have to ask ourselves, do our noble bans actually cure the disease? Or do they just force the poorest among us to pay the ultimate price? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking the hard questions.